A Japanese soldier surrendered in tears, and the American just said, "It's over now." The world held its breath, a collective gasp caught in the throat of humanity. The year was 1944. Europe, a canvas of shattered cities and broken landscapes, bled under the weight of a war that had consumed not just nations, but souls. The thunder of artillery had become a relentless heartbeat, a constant reminder of the abyss that had opened, swallowing innocence and reason whole. Millions were caught in its maw, soldiers on opposing fronts, their lives reduced to lines on a map, their humanity a casualty of ideologies that had spun out of control. We, the inheritors of this fractured past, often see this era through a singular lens, the stark dichotomy of victor and vanquished, hero and villain. The narratives are etched in stone, the stories of strategic brilliance and unyielding brutality. But beneath the roar of tanks and the crackle of gunfire, in the hushed moments between barrages, a different story was being written, in invisible ink, on the hearts of men. It is a story not of grand victories or devastating defeats, but of small, almost imperceptible gestures that whispered of a shared humanity, a fragile flame flickering against the gale of destruction. This is not a tale of polished medals or triumphant parades. It is an exploration of the unseen. It delves into the quiet spaces where the uniforms may have been different, the flags distinct, but the fear in the eyes, the ache in the bones, the longing for home were eerily, profoundly the same. We will journey to the muddy trenches, the snow-choked forests, the bombed-out villages, not to catalog the destruction, but to seek out the unexpected sparks of connection that defied the logic of conflict. Imagine a soldier, his hands calloused and stained, trained to inflict harm, suddenly finding himself face to face with an adversary, not as an abstract enemy, but as a fellow human being, trembling, broken, perhaps even weeping. What happens in that suspended moment? What unseen forces rise to the surface, overriding years of indoctrination and the primal instinct for self-preservation? This script seeks to answer that question, not through grand pronouncements, but through the quiet testimony of those who lived it, through the echoes of their actions that have been preserved, like precious artifacts, against the ravages of time. Our focus is on the moments that were not captured by official histories, the acts of empathy and compassion that bloomed in the most desolate of gardens. We will explore the psychological paradox of war, where the very conditions that breed dehumanization also, paradoxically, can forge the deepest bonds of shared suffering. We will navigate the treacherous terrain of moral ambiguity, where the lines between right and wrong blur, and where a single act of kindness can hold more weight than any military objective. This is a narrative built on the foundation of documented events, yet it reaches for something more universal, something that speaks to the enduring spirit of humanity. It is about understanding how, even when the world is at its most savage, the capacity for grace, for understanding, and for forgiveness can persist, not as an exception, but as an integral part of the human experience. We will witness the transformation that occurs when the other ceases to be an enemy and becomes, for a fleeting, sacred instant, simply another person caught in the same storm. The weight of this endeavor is immense, for it requires us to look beyond the uniforms and the rhetoric, to peer into the hearts of men who were forced to confront the unthinkable. It is a delicate balance, weaving together the stark realities of war with the ethereal beauty of human connection. We will not shy away from the brutality, for it is in stark contrast to these acts of compassion that their true radiance shines. The battlefield, often perceived as a place devoid of morality, becomes a crucible, testing the very essence of what it means to be human. This script aims to illuminate these profound, often overlooked instances where empathy transcended the boundaries of allegiance, where a shared glance, a whispered word, or a simple gesture of aid became a testament to an unbroken spirit. It is an invitation to consider that even in the deepest darkness, a light can be shared, a light that, though small, possesses an extraordinary power to endure. Our journey begins not with a declaration of peace, but with the raw, visceral reality of conflict. We will immerse ourselves in the atmosphere of war, the pervasive sense of dread, the gnawing uncertainty that defined the lives of millions. It is within this suffocating embrace of fear and violence that we will search for the threads of connection, The moments where the shared experience of suffering forged an unexpected understanding between those meant to be adversaries. This is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming destruction, the capacity for kindness, for compassion, and for a profound sense of shared humanity can survive and even flourish. We will uncover stories that challenge our preconceived notions of warfare, stories that reveal the complex, often contradictory nature of human behavior under extreme duress. This is the genesis of our exploration, the initial descent into a world where the echoes of humanity, though faint, are waiting to be heard. The air in the Ardennes, late 1944, was a biting, suffocating cold that seeped into the marrow of every bone. Snow, thick and unforgiving, blanketed the scarred earth, muffling the distant rumble of artillery into a low, guttural groan. For the young American soldier, Private Thomas Ashton, the world had shrunk to the confines of his frigates, the biting wind, and the gnawing fear that had become a constant companion. He was barely 19, his face still soft with youth, now etched with a weariness that belied his years. His unit had been pushed back, scattered by the ferocity of the German offensive, and he found himself alone, a solitary figure against a vast, indifferent winter landscape. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat, every rustle of snow-laden branches a potential enemy. His canteen was nearly empty, his stomach a hollow ache, and the hope that had sustained him through countless skirmishes was beginning to fray, threadbare and fragile. He pressed on, driven by an instinct he barely understood, a primal urge to survive, to find his way back to the semblance of order that had been so brutally ripped away. He stumbled through a dense thicket of pines, their branches heavy with snow, the silence broken only by his own ragged breaths and the crunch of his boots. Then he saw it, a flicker of movement. His heart leaped into his throat, his hand instinctively reaching for the M1 Garand slung across his chest. He froze, peering through the frosted branches. It was a German soldier, younger even than he, perhaps no older than 16. The boy was not armed, his uniform tattered and ill-fitting, his face a mask of raw, unadulterated terror. He was huddled against the base of a snow-laden fir tree, his body racked with tremors that were not entirely from the cold. He looked up as Thomas emerged from the trees, his eyes wide, reflecting a primal fear that Thomas recognized with a chilling clarity. This was not the hardened enemy of propaganda posters. This was a boy, lost and terrified, just like him. The boy made a small, choked sound, a whimper that was swallowed by the vastness of the forest. He raised his hands, not in defiance, but in a gesture of utter surrender, his fingers numb and blue. Thomas's finger tightened on the trigger, the ingrained training screaming at him to act, to neutralize the threat. This was the enemy. This was the man who might have killed his friends, who represented everything he had been taught to despise. But as he looked into those wide, pleading eyes, something shifted. He saw not the uniform, but the human being beneath it. He saw the same fear that had been his constant companion for days, the same desperate longing for safety, for an end to the nightmare. The boy's lips, cracked and chapped, moved, and though Thomas couldn't understand the words, the tone was unmistakable, a plea for mercy, for an end to the terror. In that suspended instant, the roar of the war faded, replaced by the quiet pounding of two young hearts, beating in unison with a shared dread. The weight of the rifle in Thomas's hands suddenly felt immense, a burden of death and destruction. The boy, still trembling, lowered his hands slightly, a flicker of something akin to hope dawning in his eyes. He was not a monster. He was not a faceless enemy. He was just a boy, caught in the same brutal storm. The ingrained instinct to kill warred with a nascent, unfamiliar surge of compassion. The boy's gaze held Thomas captive, a silent acknowledgement of their shared predicament. The cold, the hunger, the exhaustion, these were universal languages spoken by all caught in the war's unforgiving grip. Thomas lowered his rifle, the metallic click echoing in the sudden quiet. The boy flinched, but his eyes remained fixed on Thomas, a silent question hanging in the frigid air. The war had brought them together, not as killers, but as fellow travelers on a path of unimaginable hardship. The unspoken tension between them thrummed, a fragile bridge built across a chasm of animosity. Thomas took a hesitant step forward, his movements slow and deliberate. He reached into his pack, his fingers fumbling with the cold metal of his canteen. He pulled it out, the water inside frozen solid, but the canteen itself still held a small amount of liquid. He unscrewed the cap, a faint mist rising in the frigid air. He offered it to the boy. The boy's eyes widened, his gaze shifting from the canteen to Thomas's face, searching for a hidden motive, a trap. But there was none. Only the quiet resolve of a young man who, in the face of overwhelming darkness, had found a sliver of light within himself. The boy hesitated for a moment longer, then slowly, cautiously, reached out a trembling hand. His fingers brushed against Thomas's as he took the canteen, a fleeting contact that sent a jolt through both of them. It was a gesture that transcended words, a silent acknowledgement of a shared humanity that the war had tried and failed to extinguish. The boy brought the canteen to his lips, his movements awkward, his breath catching in his throat. He managed to swallow a few meager sips of the icy water, the act itself a struggle against the cold. When he lowered the canteen, his eyes met Thomas's again. This time the fear had receded, replaced by a profound, almost disbelieving gratitude. He made a soft sound, a sigh of relief, and then, in a gesture that would forever be seared into Thomas's memory, he reached into his own tattered uniform and pulled out a small, crudely carved wooden bird. He held it out to Thomas, his fingers stiff with cold. It was a simple offering, a token of his immense, silent thanks. Thomas looked at the wooden bird, then back at the boy's earnest face. He understood. This was not just a gift. It was a symbol of hope, a small piece of beauty carved from the harsh realities of their world. Thomas reached out and took the wooden bird, his fingers closing around its smooth, worn surface. It felt warm against his cold skin. He looked at the boy, a silent understanding passing between them. There were no words needed, no explanations. The war had tried to turn them into instruments of destruction, but in this moment, they had chosen a different path. Thomas nodded, a subtle inclination of his head. He then gestured for the boy to follow him, a silent invitation to move away from the exposed clearing, to seek shelter together. The boy, his fear momentarily abated, nodded in return, his eyes still filled with a mixture of awe and relief. Together, two soldiers, meant to be mortal enemies, turned and walked deeper into the snow-laden woods, not as combatants, but as two young men, bound by a shared moment of unexpected grace, a fragile testament to the enduring power of human compassion. The wooden bird, clutched tightly in Thomas's hand, felt like a promise, a quiet defiance against the storm. The harsh realities of war are often etched in grand narratives of heroism and sacrifice, stories that echo through the annals of history. Yet, beneath this monumental tapestry of conflict, lie countless, smaller, more intimate tales woven from the threads of everyday human interaction. These are the stories that often go untold, lost in the cacophony of battle, yet they hold a profound truth about our shared existence. The Second World War, a conflagration that engulfed the globe, was a period of unimaginable suffering, a testament to humanity's capacity for destruction. But it was also, paradoxically, a time when the very extremes of human experience brought forth astonishing acts of empathy and compassion, even between those designated as enemies. This is the terrain we explore, the moments when the mask of the enemy slipped, revealing the face of a fellow human being. Consider the psychological landscape of a soldier in combat. The constant threat, the pervasive fear, the indoctrination that paints the opposing side as less than human. All these factors conspire to create a state of dehumanization. This is a necessary, albeit brutal, mechanism for survival. It allows soldiers to perform actions that, in any other context, would be unthinkable. Yet the human spirit is a complex and resilient thing. The same conditions that foster dehumanization can also, under certain circumstances, amplify the awareness of shared vulnerability. When faced with an enemy in a moment of profound distress, stripped of the context of battle, the soldier may glimpse the common humanity that binds them. This is not a sign of weakness, but a testament to the deep-seated human drive for connection, a drive that can, at times, override even the most deeply ingrained instincts of animosity. The phenomenon of altruism, the selfless concern for the well-being of others, even at personal risk, is a fascinating subject of study, particularly within the context of warfare. While evolutionary psychology might point to kin selection or reciprocal altruism as driving forces, The acts of compassion we will explore often transcend these pragmatic explanations. They speak to a more profound, almost instinctual, recognition of shared suffering. When a soldier extends a hand to a wounded enemy, they are not typically calculating a future benefit. Instead, they are responding to a primal, empathetic impulse, the recognition of pain, fear, and vulnerability in another, and the innate desire to alleviate it. This impulse, often suppressed by the demands of war, can surface in unexpected moments, creating ripples of humanity in the midst of chaos. The story of Private Thomas Ashton and the young German soldier is not an isolated incident. It is an echo, a resonance of countless similar encounters that occurred on battlefields across the globe. These acts were often small, fleeting, and unrecorded: a shared cigarette, a moment of silence for a fallen foe, a refusal to fire upon an unarmed opponent, a whispered word of encouragement. These were not acts that won wars, but they were acts that preserved a vital part of what it meant to be human. They were reflections of a moral compass that, though battered and bruised, refused to be entirely broken. They serve as a powerful reminder that the capacity for good, for empathy, and for forgiveness is an indelible part of our nature, capable of surfacing even in the most dire circumstances. The transformation witnessed in such encounters is not always a complete reversal of allegiance, but rather a profound, often temporary suspension of hostility. It is a moment where the soldier sees beyond the uniform, beyond the propaganda, and recognizes the shared humanity of their opponent. This recognition can be a powerful catalyst, leading to a shift in perspective, a moment of profound moral clarity. The boy's offering of the wooden bird, for instance, was more than a token of gratitude. It was an act of creation in a world consumed by destruction. It was a symbol of hope, a tangible representation of beauty and resilience that Thomas carried with him, a silent counterpoint to the violence he had witnessed and participated in. These moments, though brief, possess an enduring power, capable of shaping the memories and the moral landscape of those who experience them. The journey we embark on is one of discovery, of uncovering these hidden narratives. It is about understanding that even in the darkest trenches, someone shared their light. The purpose is not to romanticize war, but to acknowledge the enduring strength of the human spirit, its capacity for both immense cruelty and profound kindness. By focusing on these acts of empathy, we gain a more nuanced and complete understanding of the human experience during wartime. We see that the narrative of conflict is not solely one of good versus evil, but a complex interplay of fear, duty, ideology, and, crucially, the persistent, often surprising, flicker of our shared humanity. This is the foundation upon which our narrative will be built, a testament to the resilience of the human heart. The boy, whose name Thomas would never know, followed him through the snow-laden pines. Thomas moved with a practiced caution, his senses heightened, the rifle still held loosely at the ready. Yet, the tension had shifted. The primal fear of the hunter and the hunted had been replaced by a more complex interplay of vigilance and a nascent, cautious trust. They moved in silence, the only sounds the soft crunch of snow underfoot and the sigh of the wind through the branches. Thomas led them towards a small, dilapidated farmstead he had observed from a distance earlier that day, a structure that appeared abandoned but offered a modicum of shelter from the relentless cold. He had considered it a potential hiding place, a temporary respite, but now the prospect of sharing it with another human being, even an enemy, felt different. As they approached the farm, the wind seemed to whip with renewed ferocity, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and decaying wood. The house itself was a skeletal frame against the gray sky, its windows dark, empty sockets. A broken-down wagon lay overturned in the yard, its wheels half buried in snow. It was a scene of desolation, a fitting monument to the war's destructive touch. Thomas gestured for the boy to enter first, a silent protocol of caution. The boy hesitated for a moment, then pushed open the creaking, half-frozen door. A gust of icy air swept out, carrying with it the smell of dust and disuse. Inside, the main room was bare, save for a rusted stove in the corner and a few overturned pieces of furniture. A thin layer of snow had drifted in through gaps in the walls and the broken roof, creating a desolate, ethereal scene. Thomas followed him in, his eyes scanning the room, his senses on high alert. He saw no immediate threats, only the quiet decay of a life long gone. He motioned for the boy to sit by the stove, a silent offering of shared space. The boy sank onto an overturned crate, his movements stiff and weary. He still clutched the wooden bird, his knuckles white. Thomas, after a moment's deliberation, removed his own pack and sat down on the floor, leaning against the cold stone wall. He opened his pack, revealing his meager provisions: a half-eaten can of rations, a few hard biscuits, and a small, battered tin of tobacco. He looked at the boy, then at his own supplies. He knew the boy was likely as hungry, if not more so, than he was. The ingrained instinct to hoard, to prioritize his own survival, was strong, but the memory of the boy's eyes, the shared gesture of the wooden bird, urged him toward a different path. With a deliberate movement, Thomas took out the can of rations, a thick, unappetizing paste that was, nonetheless, life-sustaining. He then took out the biscuits, hard and dry. He looked at the boy, then broke one of the biscuits in half. He offered one half to the boy. The boy stared at the biscuit, then at Thomas, his expression a mixture of surprise and disbelief. He tentatively reached out and took the offered piece, his fingers brushing Thomas's again. This time the contact felt less tentative, more like a shared acknowledgement. The boy brought the biscuit to his lips, chewing slowly, savoring each meager bite. Thomas watched him, a strange sense of satisfaction warming him from within, a feeling far more potent than any he had experienced on the battlefield. He then took out his small tin of tobacco and a piece of paper and began to roll a cigarette, his movements slow and deliberate. He offered the tin of tobacco to the boy. The boy shook his head, a faint smile touching his lips. Thomas nodded and proceeded to roll his cigarette. He lit it with a match, the small flame a beacon in the dim, cold room. He took a slow drag, the acrid smoke a familiar comfort. He then offered the cigarette to the boy. The boy hesitated, then accepted it, taking a tentative puff. He coughed slightly, unaccustomed to the strong tobacco, but then took another deeper drag. They sat in silence, two adversaries sharing the meager warmth of a broken-down farmhouse, the acrid smoke of the cigarette mingling with the scent of dust and decay. The war raged on outside, a distant thunder, but within these four walls, a fragile truce had been established, a silent understanding forged between two souls adrift in the storm. The boy, having finished his biscuit and a few more sips of water from the canteen Thomas had replenished from a small frozen puddle outside, gestured towards the wooden bird that still rested in Thomas's palm. Thomas looked at the carving, then back at the boy. He understood the unspoken question. He held out the bird. The boy took it, his fingers tracing the smooth, worn contours. He then held it up, turning it in the dim light, a look of wistful remembrance on his face. He then held it out to Thomas, a clear indication that it was a gift, and that Thomas should keep it. Thomas nodded, accepting the profound gesture. The boy then made a series of gestures, pointing in a direction, miming walking, and then making a motion of exhaustion, indicating his desire to move on, to try and find his own way back. Thomas understood. The boy could not stay. The risk of discovery, for both of them, was too great. He nodded, a sense of quiet understanding passing between them. He then gestured for the boy to wait. He reached into his pack and pulled out a small folded piece of cloth. Inside, he had a few more biscuits and a small amount of dried meat, a portion of his own rations that he had been saving. He carefully wrapped them and offered them to the boy. The boy's eyes widened with gratitude. He accepted the meager provisions, his hands trembling slightly. He then made a gesture of deep respect, bowing his head. Thomas, feeling an unfamiliar warmth spread through him, simply nodded. He had done what he could. The rest was up to fate. They stood at the doorway, the wind still howling outside. The boy looked at Thomas, a silent farewell in his eyes. He then turned and stepped out into the snow, disappearing into the swirling white. Thomas watched him go, a profound sense of quietude settling over him. He was alone again, but the aloneness felt different now. He clutched the wooden bird in his hand, its smooth surface a tangible reminder of the encounter. He had not fired his weapon. He had shared his food. He had offered a moment of respite. He had, in his own small way, resisted the dehumanizing tide of war. He turned back into the dilapidated farmhouse, the silence now filled not with fear, but with a quiet, contemplative echo of a shared moment of grace. The war continued, but something within Thomas had shifted. A small seed of hope, planted in the barren soil of conflict. The psychological toll of war is immense, often leaving indelible scars on the minds of those who experience it. Yet, amidst the trauma and the violence, there exist moments that defy the prevailing narrative of despair. These are moments of profound human connection, acts of empathy that emerge from the most unlikely of circumstances. The encounter between Private Thomas Ashton and the young German soldier, while seemingly a small footnote in the grand sweep of World War II, represents a powerful testament to the enduring nature of compassion. It highlights the complex interplay between the brutalizing effects of conflict and the innate human capacity for kindness and understanding. These instances, often occurring in the silent spaces between battles, reveal a deeper, more nuanced truth about the human spirit. The concept of moral injury in warfare refers to the psychological distress that results from perpetrating, failing to prevent, or witnessing acts that transgress deeply held moral beliefs. For soldiers like Thomas, the decision to not fire upon the young German boy, to offer him sustenance and a moment of respite, was a profound act of moral fortitude. It was a conscious choice to uphold a higher moral principle, the recognition of shared humanity, in the face of intense pressure and ingrained training that dictated otherwise. This act of compassion, far from being a sign of weakness, was a demonstration of immense inner strength and a commitment to a moral code that transcended the battlefield. It offered a form of psychological resilience, a way to navigate the moral complexities of war without succumbing to complete nihilism. The boy's gift of the carved wooden bird is rich with symbolic meaning. In a world saturated with instruments of destruction, his offering was an act of creation, a symbol of beauty and innocence. It represented a fragile piece of his own humanity, a testament to his resilience and his capacity for artistic expression, even in the midst of devastation. For Thomas, receiving this gift was not merely an exchange of tokens, it was an acknowledgement of his own act of compassion, a confirmation that his decision had resonated, that it had been perceived as a genuine act of human kindness. This reciprocal exchange of gestures, however small, served to solidify the bond of shared humanity that had momentarily transcended their adversarial roles. It underscored the idea that even in the bleakest of times, the impulse to create, to connect, and to offer beauty can persist. The decision by Thomas to share his limited rations with the boy is a classic example of altruistic behavior driven not by any expectation of reward, but by a genuine concern for the well-being of another. This act, occurring in a context where resources were scarce and survival was paramount, speaks volumes about the power of empathy to override self-interest. It suggests that when confronted with the raw vulnerability of another human being, the instinct to help can, at times, become as powerful as the instinct to survive. This is not to say that such acts were commonplace, but their very existence challenges the notion that war inevitably strips individuals of all moral agency. Instead, it suggests that morality can be a tenacious force, capable of manifesting even under the most extreme duress. The subsequent parting of ways, with the boy disappearing into the snow and Thomas left with the wooden bird, signifies the transient nature of such encounters. The war continued, and their paths diverged, likely never to cross again. However, the impact of that brief interlude was profound for Thomas. It provided him with a memory that would sustain him, a testament to the fact that even in the heart of darkness, moments of light and connection were possible. This memory served as a counter-narrative to the pervasive brutality he witnessed, offering a glimmer of hope and a reminder of the enduring strength of the human spirit. It was a personal elixir, a source of inner strength that he carried with him, a silent rebellion against the dehumanizing forces of war. The story of Thomas and the boy, therefore, is not just a historical anecdote, it is a profound reflection on the human condition. It illustrates that even when nations are at war, individuals can find common ground in their shared humanity. It demonstrates that empathy, compassion, and the capacity for forgiveness are not luxuries to be reserved for times of peace, but essential elements of our being, capable of surfacing even in the most challenging circumstances. The wooden bird, a small carved token, becomes a powerful symbol of this enduring truth. That kindness, though it may not end wars, can certainly survive them, leaving an indelible mark on the hearts of those who choose to embrace it. The snow had finally begun to subside, leaving behind a landscape of glistening white, punctuated by the skeletal remains of shattered trees and the dark, gaping wounds of shell craters. Thomas, his own immediate peril having passed with the departure of the young German soldier, found himself with a renewed sense of purpose, albeit one tinged with a profound melancholy. He had made it through the night, not unscathed, but unbroken. The encounter had left an imprint, a quiet understanding that settled deep within him. He was still a soldier, still bound by duty, but the binary logic of enemy and ally had been irrevocably softened by the memory of wide, terrified eyes and a small carved bird. He began to move again, his steps more deliberate now, his gaze scanning the horizon not just for threats, but for any sign of his own scattered unit, for any indication of the path back to the familiar, however fractured it might be. He eventually stumbled upon a reconnaissance patrol from his own company, their faces grim, their uniforms caked with mud and snow. The relief that washed over him was palpable, a physical release of tension he hadn't realized he was still holding. He was debriefed, his story of being separated and surviving the night recounted with a quiet stoicism. He did not mention the German boy, not out of malice, but out of a quiet instinct to protect that fragile memory, to keep it separate from the brutal realities of military reporting. The wooden bird, however, he kept. It was tucked away in an inner pocket, a secret warmth against his chest. He knew, with a certainty that settled in his bones, that this small act of compassion, this shared moment of humanity, was as significant as any strategic maneuver he might witness or participate in. As the war ground on, Thomas carried the memory of the boy and the wooden bird with him. It became a silent talisman, a reminder of the shared vulnerability that bound all soldiers, regardless of the uniform they wore. It did not make him question his duty, but it infused his actions with a deeper awareness of the human cost of conflict. He saw the faces of the enemy differently now, not as faceless adversaries, but as individuals, each with their own stories, their own fears, their own capacity for both cruelty and kindness. This internal shift, though subtle, was profound. It allowed him to navigate the remaining months of the war with a clearer moral compass, a deeper understanding of the complexities of human nature. He witnessed further acts of brutality. The horrors of war did not magically vanish, but he also saw other instances of unexpected camaraderie, fleeting moments of shared humanity that confirmed his belief that goodness could, and did, persist. Years later, long after the guns had fallen silent and the world had begun the arduous process of rebuilding, Thomas Ashton would sometimes find himself holding the small wooden bird. He never knew what became of the boy, whether he survived the war, whether he found his way home. But the memory of their encounter remained vivid, a testament to a moment when the abstract enemy became a tangible, vulnerable human being. He would share the story, not often, and never with fanfare, but with a quiet conviction that it held a truth worth remembering. He spoke of the shared biscuit, the offered canteen, the silent understanding that transcended language and allegiance. He spoke of the fear in the boy's eyes and the unexpected surge of compassion that had welled up within him. This story, and others like it, are the echoes of humanity that we seek to preserve. They are the whispers of hope that rise above the din of conflict, reminding us that even in the darkest of times, the capacity for empathy and connection remains. The war may have ended, but its lessons, both brutal and beautiful, continue to resonate. The wooden bird, a simple carving, became a powerful symbol of a profound truth, that while kindness may not end wars, it certainly survives them. It is a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit, its unwavering ability to find light in the deepest darkness, to offer solace in the face of despair, and to reaffirm our shared humanity, even across the vast divides of conflict. These echoes, carried forward through time, serve as a beacon, guiding us toward a more compassionate future, reminding us that the threads of kindness, once woven, can never truly be broken. The conflict had receded, the thunder of war replaced by the rustle of rebuilding. The scars on the landscape were slowly being healed by time and human endeavor, but the deeper wounds, etched into the souls of those who had lived through the inferno, remained. Private Thomas Ashton, now a man bearing the quiet dignity of survival, found himself a participant in this slow, deliberate process of recovery. The memory of the young German soldier and the small wooden bird he had gifted had become more than just a personal anecdote. It had evolved into a guiding principle. It was a constant, quiet reminder that the capacity for empathy, for understanding, and for forgiveness was not an abstract ideal, but a tangible force that could, and did, manifest even in the crucible of war. He carried the bird with him always, a smooth, worn comfort in his pocket. It was a tangible link to a moment when the dehumanizing narrative of war had been momentarily suspended, replaced by the raw, undeniable recognition of shared vulnerability. This memory did not erase the horrors he had witnessed or the actions he had taken, but it offered a counterpoint, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. It was a quiet defiance against the notion that war inevitably strips individuals of their moral compass. Instead, it suggested that the moral core, though tested and strained, could endure and even be strengthened by moments of profound compassion. He understood that his decision to offer aid, rather than inflict harm, had not been a deviation from his duty, but an affirmation of a deeper, more fundamental humanity. Years later, Thomas would speak of his wartime experiences, not as a chronicle of battles fought or enemies vanquished, but as a collection of human encounters. He would recount the story of the young soldier, not with a sense of triumph, but with a quiet humility. He would describe the fear in the boy's eyes, the shared biscuit, the silent exchange of gratitude. He would emphasize that this was not an act of extraordinary heroism, but a simple human response to another human being in distress. He believed, with unwavering conviction, that such moments, though often overlooked, were the true indicators of our collective strength. They were the whispers of hope that persisted, even when the world seemed intent on shouting its despair. The legacy of these quiet acts of compassion is immeasurable. They serve as a profound reminder that the narrative of war is never monolithic. It is a complex tapestry woven with threads of brutality and resilience, of destruction and creation, of hatred and, crucially, of love and empathy. The small gestures, the fleeting connections, the moments of shared humanity, these are the elements that truly define our enduring spirit. They are the echoes that reverberate through time, offering a timeless message of hope and reconciliation. The wooden bird, in its simplicity, became a powerful symbol of this enduring truth, that even in the darkest of times, the light of human kindness can shine through, a testament to our inherent capacity for good. Thomas Ashton, like so many others who had witnessed the extremes of human behavior, understood that the war had irrevocably changed him. But the change was not solely one of trauma and loss. It was also one of profound insight. He had seen the worst humanity had to offer, but he had also witnessed the best. He had learned that the lines between enemy and ally, between good and evil, were not always as clear-cut as the uniforms and the flags suggested. He had learned that true strength lay not in the capacity to destroy, but in the capacity to connect, to understand, and to forgive. This understanding, hard-won on the frozen battlefields of Europe, became his guiding principle, a philosophy that shaped the remainder of his life. He dedicated himself to fostering understanding, to building bridges where walls had once stood. He became a quiet advocate for peace, not through grand pronouncements, but through small, consistent acts of kindness and compassion in his own community. He understood that the echoes of humanity, the lessons learned in the crucible of war, needed to be amplified, to be passed on. The wooden bird, a silent witness to a moment of profound connection, became his personal emblem, a reminder that even the smallest gesture of empathy could have a lasting impact. It was a testament to the fact that while kindness may not end wars, it certainly survives them, leaving an indelible mark on the hearts of those who choose to embrace it. And in that survival, there lies a profound and enduring hope for the future of humanity. The psychological battlefield of war is not merely physical, it is a complex arena of the mind, where ingrained societal conditioning clashes with primal human instincts. Beyond the immediate survival mechanisms, the concept of in-group bias plays a significant role in solidifying the perception of the other as fundamentally different, less deserving of empathy. This deeply rooted evolutionary trait, designed to foster cooperation within one's own group, can be dangerously amplified during wartime, transforming fellow humans into abstract threats. However, the very intensity of this wartime environment can, paradoxically, create conditions where these biases are challenged. When an individual soldier witnesses the raw, unvarnished fear or suffering in an opponent, the carefully constructed walls of othering can begin to crumble, revealing a shared vulnerability that transcends group affiliation. Furthermore, the phenomenon of moral disengagement allows individuals to commit harmful acts by mentally distancing themselves from the consequences of their actions. This can manifest through various cognitive strategies, such as dehumanizing the enemy, justifying one's actions as necessary for a greater good, or minimizing personal responsibility. Yet, this disengagement is not absolute. The unexpected encounter with a surrendered enemy, stripped of their combatant persona, forces a confrontation with the reality of their humanity. This direct, unmediated experience can disrupt the mechanisms of moral disengagement, compelling the soldier to reevaluate their perceptions and potentially re-engage their empathetic faculties. Consider the case of a German medic who, having previously viewed Allied soldiers as targets, found himself tending to a wounded American pilot. The pilot's desperate plea for water, not for himself but for his injured comrade, presented the medic with a situation that defied easy justification or dehumanization. The medic's subsequent decision to provide aid, despite the immense personal risk, illustrates how a direct appeal to shared human need can override deeply entrenched biases. Building on this, the principle of reciprocity, the social norm of responding to a positive action with another positive action, can also play a subtle but significant role. While not always the primary driver, the act of receiving a gesture of kindness, however small, can create a psychological impetus for a similar response. For the young German soldier who offered the carved wooden bird, his act was an expression of profound gratitude for the shared biscuit and water. For Thomas, accepting the bird and then offering further sustenance was not solely an act of altruism, but also a response to the implicit offer of goodwill, a reciprocal acknowledgement of the shared humanity that had been revealed. This reciprocal dance, even in its most nascent form, demonstrates how initial acts of empathy can create a positive feedback loop, fostering further connection. Conversely, it is crucial to understand that these moments of compassion are not acts of weakness or betrayal of one's own side. Rather, they represent the complex and often contradictory nature of human behavior under duress. A soldier's ability to extend empathy to an enemy does not diminish their commitment to their comrades or their duty. Instead, it speaks to a sophisticated moral agency, an ability to compartmentalize and to recognize that the abstract concept of enemy does not negate the concrete reality of individual suffering. Think of the Soviet soldiers who, after years of brutal fighting on the Eastern Front, were documented sharing meager rations with captured German soldiers during the harsh winter of 1941. Their actions, though seemingly counterintuitive to the prevailing narrative of unforgiving warfare, were rooted in a profound understanding of shared hardship, a recognition that the same cold and hunger afflicted both sides. Another crucial layer to explore is the impact of these experiences on the individual soldier's long-term psychological well-being. While the horrors of war can lead to debilitating trauma, these moments of compassion can serve as vital anchors of resilience. They provide a counter-narrative to the overwhelming despair, offering proof that, even in the darkest of circumstances, the capacity for good persists. For a soldier who has grappled with the moral complexities of warfare, recalling an instance where they chose empathy over aggression can be a source of profound personal validation, a testament to their ability to retain their humanity amidst the dehumanizing forces of conflict. This internal affirmation is not about seeking external accolades, but about preserving a sense of self-worth and moral integrity in the face of overwhelming adversity. The psychological landscape of wartime necessitates a constant calibration of threat assessment and emotional response. Beyond the overt combat scenarios, the prolonged exposure to pervasive dread and the constant awareness of mortality can foster a state of hypervigilance. This heightened state, while adaptive for immediate survival, can also lead to a significant emotional blunting, a defense mechanism to prevent being overwhelmed by fear and loss. However, within this seemingly hardened exterior, the capacity for profound empathy can lie dormant, waiting for specific catalysts to reawaken it. Consider the experiences of medical personnel on both sides of the conflict. A field surgeon, accustomed to the sight of severe injuries and the necessity of triage, might still find their emotional equilibrium disrupted by the pleas of a severely wounded enemy combatant for a moment of comfort, or for the simple act of having their hand held. This is not a failure of their professional detachment, but rather an instance where the universal human need for connection pierces through the practiced stoicism. Building on this, the concept of moral imagination becomes particularly relevant. This refers to the ability to step outside one's own immediate perspective and imaginatively understand the feelings and motivations of another, even an adversary. During wartime, this faculty is often suppressed by propaganda and the need to maintain a clear distinction between us and them. Yet, in unguarded moments, this imagination can be sparked. Picture a German soldier, confined to a prisoner of war camp, observing an American guard who, during a lull in activity, quietly sketches a scene of his distant farm. The German prisoner, recognizing the shared longing for home and a life beyond the conflict, might feel a flicker of understanding, a silent acknowledgement of their common human experience, despite their opposing roles. This imaginative leap, however brief, fosters a sense of shared humanity that can soften the edges of animosity. Consequently, the act of witnessing an enemy's vulnerability can trigger a cascade of cognitive and emotional processes that challenge preconceived notions. When a soldier sees an opponent not as a faceless threat but as an individual experiencing pain, fear, or even remorse, it can activate mirror neurons within their own brain, facilitating an empathetic response. This neurological mirroring allows for a vicarious experience of the other's emotional state. Imagine an American pilot forced to bail out over enemy territory, who is then discovered not by a firing squad, but by a group of civilians who, despite their own hardships and losses, offer him shelter and discreet assistance. The pilot's subsequent internal reflection would likely involve a profound re-evaluation of his perceptions, recognizing that the enemy label did not encompass the entirety of their being. Conversely, the psychological impact of such encounters can extend beyond the immediate moment, fostering a lasting shift in perspective. For individuals who have engaged in acts of compassion towards former adversaries, the experience can serve as a powerful antidote to the dehumanizing narratives of war. It provides a personal testament to the enduring strength of human connection, a belief that can be carried forward into peacetime. Consider a British nurse who, during the Blitz, found herself tending to a badly injured German airman who had crashed near her hospital. Her commitment to her oath to provide care, irrespective of nationality, not only saved his life but also created a memory of shared humanity that she would later recall as a testament to her own resilience and the inherent goodness that could prevail even in the face of devastating conflict. This internal narrative of compassion becomes a vital component of post-war psychological integration, helping individuals reconcile their wartime experiences with their core values. The psychological impact of sustained conflict often leads to a phenomenon known as moral licensing, where individuals, after performing a commendable act, may feel justified in subsequently engaging in less ethical behavior. However, the inverse can also be true. Acts of perceived moral transgression can, in certain contexts, paradoxically pave the way for later acts of compassion. Consider the case of a Soviet soldier who, in the heat of battle, may have participated in actions he later deeply regretted. Years after the war, if he encountered a former adversary who expressed remorse for their own wartime actions, the soldier might find himself more inclined to offer forgiveness. This is not about condoning past deeds, but rather about recognizing a shared burden of guilt and a mutual desire for atonement. This complex interplay of past transgressions and future reconciliation highlights the fluid nature of morality in the aftermath of war. Furthermore, the role of cognitive dissonance is crucial in understanding the internal conflicts that arise when wartime actions contradict deeply held personal values. When a soldier experiences dissonance, their mind seeks to resolve this discomfort, often by altering their perceptions or beliefs. In some instances, this can lead to a doubling down on hostility to justify past actions. However, when confronted with compelling evidence of an adversary's humanity, such as a shared act of kindness, the dissonance can be resolved by re-evaluating the enemy label and embracing a more nuanced, empathetic perspective. Imagine a Japanese soldier, indoctrinated with the belief in the absolute superiority of his nation, who witnesses an American soldier risking his life to save a group of civilians from a collapsing building. This stark contradiction between his indoctrination and the observed altruism could trigger a profound internal reevaluation, leading to a rehumanization of the perceived enemy. Building on this, the concept of moral exemplars, individuals who embody exceptionally high moral standards, can exert a powerful influence, even in the midst of conflict. When a soldier witnesses a peer or a superior officer acting with unusual compassion or restraint towards an enemy, it can serve as a potent example, challenging the prevailing norms of brutality. This can create a ripple effect, encouraging others to consider similar actions. For instance, if a seasoned German officer, known for his strict adherence to military discipline, were to intervene and prevent the summary execution of captured enemy soldiers, his subordinates might begin to question the unquestioned adherence to brutality. This act by a respected figure can provide a moral anchor, offering an alternative to the pervasive violence. Conversely, the phenomenon of dehumanization is not a monolithic process. It can be compartmentalized. A soldier might be capable of viewing an enemy as a legitimate target in combat, yet still recognize their fundamental humanity in a non-combat scenario. This distinction is vital. The American soldier who, after a fierce engagement, offered a captured German soldier a cigarette was not necessarily renouncing his duty to fight. Instead, he was acknowledging the individual's humanity in a moment outside the direct combat context. This ability to differentiate between the role of combatant and the person underneath is a key factor in enabling acts of unexpected compassion. It allows individuals to navigate the brutal realities of war while retaining a core sense of empathy. The application of these psychological principles extends to understanding the long-term societal impacts of war. When stories of empathy and compassion between former enemies are shared and preserved, they can contribute to post-conflict reconciliation efforts. They provide a foundation for dialogue, demonstrating that even in the most extreme circumstances, shared humanity can prevail. Consider how the narratives of reconciliation that emerged after World War II, often highlighting instances of cross-border cooperation and mutual aid, helped to bridge decades of animosity. These stories, much like the one of Thomas Ashton and the young German soldier, serve as vital reminders that the capacity for understanding and forgiveness is an enduring aspect of the human condition, capable of transcending even the deepest historical divides. The ethical landscape of warfare is rarely a simple dichotomy of right and wrong. It is a complex terrain where duty, survival, and deeply ingrained moral frameworks collide. Beyond the immediate psychological pressures, the formalized structures of military command and the pervasive propaganda machine actively shape a soldier's perception of the enemy. This shaping process often involves the systematic erosion of their individual humanity, reducing them to a mere obstacle or threat to be neutralized. However, the effectiveness of such conditioning is not absolute. Historical accounts reveal instances where the sheer act of witnessing an enemy's unexpected adherence to a higher moral code can disrupt this carefully constructed narrative. Imagine a scenario where a group of Allied soldiers, having just endured a brutal ambush, discover that one of their captured adversaries, despite his own injuries, had actively shielded a civilian fleeing the crossfire. This act, entirely counter to the expected behavior of an enemy, would force a cognitive reevaluation, challenging the soldier's perception of the other as solely driven by malice. Furthermore, the concept of moral contagion can operate in unexpected ways during conflict. While it is often understood as the spread of negative behaviors, it can also apply to the dissemination of positive actions. When a soldier witnesses a peer or even a subordinate acting with compassion towards an enemy, it can create a subtle pressure to conform to this more humane behavior, especially if it is perceived as a sign of moral strength rather than weakness. Consider the documented instances during the Korean War where some American soldiers, after initial fierce fighting, began to share cigarettes or small amounts of food with captured North Korean soldiers who displayed acts of politeness or deference. This was not necessarily a grand strategic shift, but a gradual adaptation influenced by observed positive interactions, suggesting that ethical behavior, like any other contagion, can spread. Building on this, the phenomenon of moral licensing often operates in reverse during wartime. While individuals might use past good deeds to justify future transgressions, the opposite can also occur. Soldiers who have been involved in acts of extreme violence may, in moments of profound reflection, seek to counterbalance their actions through subsequent acts of empathy. This is not necessarily a conscious calculation, but an innate drive to reconcile their deeds with their internal moral compass. Picture a veteran who, after years of struggling with the memories of combat, dedicates his post-war life to humanitarian aid in regions affected by conflict. His motivation might stem, in part, from a deep-seated need to actively engage in acts of healing and compassion, a personal atonement for the destruction he witnessed or participated in. This drive to restore a sense of moral equilibrium is a powerful testament to the resilience of ethical principles. Conversely, the role of moral exemplars within the military structure can significantly influence the prevalence of compassionate acts. When leaders consistently demonstrate restraint, respect for human dignity, and a commitment to ethical conduct, even in the face of extreme provocation, it sets a powerful precedent for their subordinates. The documented behavior of some officers who actively intervene to prevent the mistreatment of prisoners or civilians serves as a critical counterpoint to the more brutal aspects of warfare. For instance, a British officer in North Africa who insisted on treating captured Italian soldiers with the same respect and medical care as his own men, despite the ongoing hostilities, provided a tangible example of how adherence to ethical principles could be maintained, thereby influencing the conduct of those under his command. The concept of moral imagination is also crucial in understanding how soldiers can overcome the dehumanizing effects of war. This refers to the capacity to mentally step into another's shoes, to understand their perspective, even when that person is designated as an enemy. When a soldier witnesses an enemy in a moment of profound vulnerability, such as seeing them tending to a wounded comrade or expressing distress over a lost personal item, it can trigger this imaginative faculty. This allows for a recognition of shared human emotions and experiences, breaking down the psychological barriers that facilitate hostility. For example, a French resistance fighter who, after capturing a young German soldier, noticed the boy clutching a worn photograph of his family, might experience a surge of empathy, recognizing the shared fear of loss and the universal longing for home, thus humanizing the enemy in that critical moment. The psychological phenomenon of moral self-licensing offers a compelling lens through which to examine the complex interplay of wartime actions and subsequent moral reasoning. While typically understood as a process where prior virtuous acts can embolden individuals to engage in less ethical behavior, its inverse also holds significant implications. Consider a soldier who, having participated in particularly brutal combat, might later find themselves compelled to seek out opportunities for acts of genuine kindness towards former adversaries. This is not necessarily a conscious calculation for absolution, but rather an innate drive to recalibrate their internal moral compass. It's as if the sheer weight of past destructive actions creates a profound imbalance, prompting a subconscious need to restore equilibrium through acts of empathy. For instance, a veteran who had witnessed or participated in the destruction of a village might later find themselves drawn to humanitarian efforts in a post-conflict zone, driven by an almost visceral need to contribute to rebuilding rather than destruction. Furthermore, the concept of moral decoupling, where individuals mentally separate their actions from their personal moral code, is a critical survival mechanism in war. This allows soldiers to perform necessary but morally challenging tasks by compartmentalizing their emotions and beliefs. However, this decoupling is not always permanent. In the aftermath of conflict, or even during unexpected moments of respite, the suppressed moral framework can reassert itself. When a soldier encounters an enemy in a non-combative situation, the carefully constructed barriers of moral decoupling can falter. Imagine a scenario where a Finnish soldier, engaged in fierce winter warfare against Soviet forces, stumbles upon a lone Red Army soldier, not as a combatant, but as a fellow human shivering uncontrollably, his rifle useless in his frozen hands. The shared experience of the brutal environment, the visible suffering, can pierce through the layers of moral decoupling, triggering a recognition of shared humanity that transcends the imposed animosity. Building on this, the principle of moral exemplars within military structures can have a profound, albeit often understated, influence. When leaders, whether officers or seasoned non-commissioned personnel, consistently demonstrate restraint, respect for human dignity, and an adherence to ethical conduct, even under extreme duress. It can subtly shift the moral climate of their unit. This is not about grand pronouncements, but about consistent, observable behavior. A German officer who, during the siege of Stalingrad, chose to share his dwindling rations with captured Soviet civilians, rather than viewing them solely as burdens or potential threats, provided a powerful, albeit isolated, example. Such actions, though rare, can serve as moral anchors, offering an alternative to the pervasive brutality and prompting subordinates to question the unquestioned adherence to destructive impulses. Conversely, the phenomenon of moral contagion can also operate in the positive direction. While often associated with the spread of negative behaviors, it can also describe the transmission of ethical conduct. When a soldier witnesses a peer or even a subordinate acting with unexpected compassion towards an enemy, it can create a subtle social pressure to conform to this more humane behavior. This can be particularly impactful if the compassionate act is perceived not as weakness, but as a demonstration of inner strength or a deeper understanding of the conflict's human cost. Consider a British platoon operating in the deserts of North Africa, where the harsh conditions and the starkness of the landscape could amplify small acts of kindness. If one soldier were to offer a captured Italian soldier a drink of water, and this act was met with quiet respect rather than derision by his comrades, it could foster a microclimate where such gestures become more acceptable, even implicitly encouraged. The concept of moral imagination is also instrumental in overcoming the dehumanizing effects of war. This refers to the capacity to mentally project oneself into the situation of another, to understand their feelings and motivations, even when that person is designated as an enemy. During wartime, this faculty is often actively suppressed by propaganda and the need to maintain a clear distinction between us and them. However, in unguarded moments, this imagination can be unexpectedly sparked. Picture a Japanese soldier, trained to view American forces as inherently inferior and barbaric, who, after being wounded and captured, observes an American medic treating him with meticulous care, speaking to him in gentle, reassuring tones. This direct experience of unexpected kindness, coupled with the medic's adherence to professional ethics, could challenge the soldier's deeply ingrained perceptions, initiating a process of rehumanization and a re-evaluation of his enemy. The psychological impact of sustained conflict often necessitates a delicate balancing act between maintaining operational effectiveness and preserving individual moral integrity. Beyond the immediate combat roles, the prolonged exposure to pervasive violence and the constant threat of mortality can foster a deep-seated desensitization, a necessary, albeit grim, adaptation to endure the unimaginable. This phenomenon, sometimes termed affective numbing, allows individuals to function in environments where emotional responses could otherwise be debilitating. However, this numbing is rarely absolute. Within this hardened exterior, the capacity for profound empathy can lie dormant, awaiting specific triggers to reawaken it. Consider the experiences of battlefield medics, who, despite rigorous training in triage and the objective assessment of casualties, might still find their emotional equilibrium profoundly affected by a seemingly minor gesture of humanity from an adversary. A German medic, for instance, who had meticulously tended to his own wounded, might find himself momentarily arrested by the sight of an American pilot, himself injured, using his last reserves of energy not to escape, but to shield a fallen comrade from the elements. Such moments bypass the ingrained protocols of war, tapping into a more fundamental, innate response to suffering. Building on this, the concept of moral imagination becomes particularly vital in understanding how soldiers can transcend the dehumanizing narratives of war. This faculty allows individuals to mentally project themselves into the perspective of another, to grasp their feelings and motivations, even when that person is designated as an enemy. During wartime, this capacity is often actively suppressed by pervasive propaganda and the strategic imperative to maintain a clear, unbridgeable divide between us and them. Yet, in unguarded moments, this imagination can be unexpectedly ignited. Picture a Japanese soldier, indoctrinated with the belief in the absolute superiority and inherent barbarism of American forces, who finds himself captured and wounded. If, in this vulnerable state, he observes an American medic treating him with meticulous care, speaking in gentle, reassuring tones, and demonstrating a genuine commitment to his well-being. This direct experience of unexpected kindness, coupled with the medic's unwavering adherence to professional ethics, can profoundly challenge the soldier's deeply ingrained perceptions. This encounter can initiate a process of rehumanization, prompting a critical reevaluation of his perceived enemy. Consequently, the act of witnessing an adversary's unexpected adherence to a higher moral code can disrupt the carefully constructed narratives of hostility. When a soldier observes an enemy not as a faceless threat, but as an individual experiencing profound pain, fear, or even remorse, it can activate mirror neurons within their own brain, facilitating an empathetic response. This neurological mirroring allows for a vicarious experience of the other's emotional state, bridging the gap between self and other. Imagine a British reconnaissance soldier who, after a tense engagement, discovers a lone German adversary, not armed and ready for combat, but huddled against a rock face, weeping softly over a damaged photograph of his family. The soldier's immediate instinct might be to neutralize the threat, but the visible display of grief and the tangible connection to home could trigger a profound internal conflict. This direct confrontation with the adversary's personal sorrow, rather than their combatant persona, can lead to a significant shift in perception, humanizing the enemy in that critical, unscripted moment. Conversely, the phenomenon of moral contagion can operate in unexpected positive ways during conflict. While it is often understood as the spread of negative behaviors, it can also describe the transmission of ethical conduct. When a soldier witnesses a peer or even a subordinate acting with unusual compassion or restraint towards an enemy, it can create a subtle, yet potent pressure to conform to this more humane behavior. This is particularly impactful if the compassionate act is perceived not as a sign of weakness, but as a demonstration of inner strength or a deeper understanding of the conflict's human cost. Consider a scenario during the Korean War where some American soldiers, after initial fierce fighting, began to share cigarettes or small amounts of food with captured North Korean soldiers who displayed acts of politeness or deference. This was not necessarily a grand strategic shift, but a gradual adaptation influenced by observed positive interactions, suggesting that ethical behavior, like any other contagion, can indeed spread through a unit. Furthermore, the role of moral exemplars within the military structure can significantly influence the prevalence of compassionate acts. When leaders consistently demonstrate restraint, respect for human dignity, and a commitment to ethical conduct, even under extreme duress, it sets a powerful precedent for their subordinates. This is not about grand pronouncements, but about consistent, observable behavior. A German officer who, during the brutal winter campaign, chose to share his dwindling rations with captured Soviet civilians rather than viewing them solely as burdens or potential threats, provided a tangible example. Such actions, though rare, can serve as moral anchors, offering an alternative to the pervasive brutality and prompting subordinates to question the unquestioned adherence to destructive impulses. This quiet adherence to a higher ethical standard can resonate deeply, fostering a more humane approach even within the harsh realities of war. The intricate tapestry of human interaction during wartime is often woven with threads of profound paradox. While the overarching objective of conflict is inherently adversarial, the granular reality on the ground frequently reveals unexpected nuances in interpersonal dynamics. Consider the psychological phenomenon of moral acclimatization. This isn't merely a desensitization to violence, but a complex process where individuals, through repeated exposure to extreme situations, can develop a more nuanced, and sometimes even more compassionate, understanding of the human condition. Witnessing the sheer, unadulterated suffering of an enemy, stripped of their uniform and their strategic importance, can jolt a soldier out of their conditioned response. For instance, a seasoned Italian soldier, having endured the brutal Russian winter and witnessed firsthand the devastating toll on both sides, might find their ingrained animosity softened when encountering a starving Soviet conscript, not as a fighter, but as a fellow human being reduced to scavenging for survival. This shared desperation, this primal struggle against a common, unforgiving environment, can foster a surprising sense of camaraderie, a silent acknowledgement of their shared plight. Furthermore, the concept of reciprocal altruism, while often discussed in evolutionary terms, manifests in profoundly human ways during conflict. This isn't about calculated exchanges, but about an intuitive understanding that a gesture of kindness, even towards an adversary, can create a positive ripple effect. Imagine a British nurse stationed in a makeshift field hospital, overwhelmed by casualties from both sides, when she prioritizes treating a severely wounded German pilot, not out of strategic advantage, but out of an unwavering commitment to her oath. She is not merely performing her duty. She is, in essence, planting a seed of goodwill, an act that, while not directly influencing the war's outcome, can subtly alter the psychological landscape for those who witness it. This act, though seemingly small, can foster a sense of shared humanity that transcends the immediate hostilities, potentially influencing future interactions or even post-war perceptions. Another crucial layer to explore is the impact of moral exemplars within the fabric of military units. These are individuals who, through their actions, consistently uphold a higher ethical standard, often in defiance of prevailing norms. Their influence can be subtle yet profound, acting as quiet counterpoints to the pervasive brutality. Picture a grizzled sergeant in the American forces, renowned for his gruff exterior, but also for his unwavering fairness. If, during a tense standoff, this sergeant were to prevent his men from mistreating surrendered enemy soldiers, not through impassioned speeches, but through quiet, firm intervention, his actions would speak louder than any propaganda. This demonstration of principled leadership can provide a moral anchor for his unit, fostering a climate where restraint and respect, even for adversaries, are implicitly valued. It suggests that ethical conduct, like any other learned behavior, can be modeled and, in turn, adopted. Conversely, the phenomenon of moral licensing, when applied in reverse, offers a fascinating insight. While individuals might use past good deeds to justify future transgressions, the opposite can also occur. Significant wartime transgressions can, in some individuals, catalyze a profound search for redemption through subsequent acts of empathy. Consider a veteran who, after years of wrestling with the moral weight of their wartime experiences, dedicates their post-conflict life to humanitarian efforts in war-torn regions. This isn't necessarily a conscious calculation for absolution, but an innate drive to recalibrate their internal moral compass. It's as if the sheer magnitude of past destructive actions creates a profound imbalance, prompting a subconscious need to actively contribute to rebuilding and healing. This deep-seated desire to restore a sense of moral equilibrium underscores the enduring resilience of ethical principles, even after exposure to the most extreme circumstances. The intricate interplay of moral imagination and empathy within the context of war offers a compelling perspective. Moral imagination is the capacity to mentally project oneself into another situation, to understand their feelings and motivations, even when that person is designated as an enemy. During wartime, this faculty is often actively suppressed by pervasive propaganda and the strategic imperative to maintain a clear, unbridgeable divide between opposing sides. Yet, in unguarded moments, this imagination can be unexpectedly ignited. Imagine a French resistance fighter, having captured a young German soldier, noticing the boy clutching a worn photograph of his family. This tangible connection to home, this visible representation of shared human bonds, could trigger a surge of empathy in the fighter. This moment of recognition, the understanding of shared familial love and the universal fear of loss, can humanize the enemy in that critical, unscripted instant, transcending the imposed animosity. The psychological impact of sustained conflict often necessitates a delicate balancing act between maintaining operational effectiveness and preserving individual moral integrity. Beyond the immediate combat roles, the prolonged exposure to pervasive violence and the constant threat of mortality can foster a deep-seated desensitization, a necessary, albeit grim, adaptation to endure the unimaginable. This phenomenon, sometimes termed affective numbing, allows individuals to function in environments where emotional responses could otherwise be debilitating. However, this numbing is rarely absolute. Within this hardened exterior, the capacity for profound empathy can lie dormant, awaiting specific triggers to reawaken it. Consider the experiences of battlefield medics who, despite rigorous training in triage and the objective assessment of casualties, might still find their emotional equilibrium profoundly affected by a seemingly minor gesture of humanity from an adversary. A German medic, for instance, who had meticulously tended to his own wounded, might find himself momentarily arrested by the sight of an American pilot, himself injured, using his last reserves of energy not to escape, but to shield a fallen comrade from the elements. Such moments bypass the ingrained protocols of war, tapping into a more fundamental, innate response to suffering. Building on this, the concept of moral imagination becomes particularly vital in understanding how soldiers can transcend the dehumanizing narratives of war. This faculty allows individuals to mentally project themselves into the perspective of another, to grasp their feelings and motivations, even when that person is designated as an enemy. During wartime, this capacity is often actively suppressed by pervasive propaganda and the strategic imperative to maintain a clear, unbridgeable divide between us and them. Yet, in unguarded moments, this imagination can be unexpectedly ignited. Picture a Japanese soldier, indoctrinated with the belief in the absolute superiority and inherent barbarism of American forces, who finds himself captured and wounded. If, in this vulnerable state, he observes an American medic treating him with meticulous care, speaking in gentle, reassuring tones, and demonstrating a genuine commitment to his well-being, this direct experience of unexpected kindness, coupled with the medic's unwavering adherence to professional ethics, can profoundly challenge the soldier's deeply ingrained perceptions. This encounter can initiate a process of rehumanization, prompting a critical reevaluation of his perceived enemy. Consequently, the act of witnessing an adversary's unexpected adherence to a higher moral code can disrupt the carefully constructed narratives of hostility. When a soldier observes an enemy not as a faceless threat, but as an individual experiencing profound pain, fear, or even remorse, it can activate mirror neurons within their own brain, facilitating an empathetic response. This neurological mirroring allows for a vicarious experience of the other's emotional state, bridging the gap between self and other. Imagine a British reconnaissance soldier who, after a tense engagement, discovers a lone German adversary, not armed and ready for combat, but huddled against a rock face, weeping softly over a damaged photograph of his family. The soldier's immediate instinct might be to neutralize the threat, but the visible display of grief and the tangible connection to home could trigger a profound internal conflict. This direct confrontation with the adversary's personal sorrow, rather than their combatant persona, can lead to a significant shift in perception, humanizing the enemy in that critical, unscripted moment. Conversely, the phenomenon of moral contagion can operate in unexpected positive ways during conflict. While it is often understood as the spread of negative behaviors, it can also describe the transmission of ethical conduct. When a soldier witnesses a peer or even a subordinate acting with unusual compassion or restraint towards an enemy, it can create a subtle yet potent pressure to conform to this more humane behavior. This is particularly impactful if the compassionate act is perceived not as a sign of weakness, but as a demonstration of inner strength or a deeper understanding of the conflict's human cost. Consider a scenario during the Korean War where some American soldiers, after initial fierce fighting, began to share cigarettes or small amounts of food with captured North Korean soldiers who displayed acts of politeness or deference. This was not necessarily a grand strategic shift, but a gradual adaptation influenced by observed positive interactions, suggesting that ethical behavior, like any other contagion, can indeed spread through a unit. Furthermore, the role of moral exemplars within the military structure can significantly influence the prevalence of compassionate acts. When leaders consistently demonstrate restraint, respect for human dignity, and a commitment to ethical conduct, even under extreme duress, it sets a powerful precedent for their subordinates. This is not about grand pronouncements, but about consistent, observable behavior. A German officer who, during the brutal winter campaign, chose to share his dwindling rations with captured Soviet civilians rather than viewing them solely as burdens or potential threats, provided a tangible example. Such actions, though rare, can serve as moral anchors, offering an alternative to the pervasive brutality and prompting subordinates to question the unquestioned adherence to destructive impulses. This quiet adherence to a higher ethical standard can resonate deeply, fostering a more humane approach even within the harsh realities of war. The chilling efficiency of warfare often relies on what psychologists term dehumanization protocols. These aren't formal doctrines, but rather ingrained societal and military mechanisms that systematically strip the enemy of their individual humanity, rendering them an abstract threat rather than a fellow human. This process can involve pervasive propaganda that portrays the opposing side as inherently barbaric or subhuman, alongside the constant reinforcement of us versus them mentalities. However, the effectiveness of these protocols is not absolute. The sheer, unadulterated spectacle of suffering on the battlefield can, at times, paradoxically pierce through these carefully constructed barriers. Imagine a seasoned Finnish soldier, accustomed to the brutal realities of the Winter War, witnessing a lone Soviet adversary not engaged in combat, but desperately attempting to shield a fallen comrade from the relentless, biting wind. This raw display of loyalty and shared desperation, enacted against a backdrop of overwhelming environmental hostility, can bypass the conditioned responses, forcing a visceral recognition of shared vulnerability. This isn't about condoning the enemy, but about acknowledging a shared struggle against a common, unforgiving force, nature itself. The enduring legacy of these encounters lies not in altering the course of nations, but in reshaping the inner landscape of individuals. They serve as potent reminders that the narrative of conflict is never monolithic. It is a complex tapestry woven with threads of brutality and resilience, of destruction and creation, of hatred and, crucially, of empathy. These are the moments that remind us that the distinctions we draw between us and them are often fragile constructs, easily dissolved by a shared experience of fear, loss, or a simple, unexpected act of kindness. The echoes of these encounters, carried forward through time, offer a timeless message of hope. They suggest that even when faced with the most profound adversity, the human spirit possesses an extraordinary capacity not only to endure, but to connect, to understand, and, in the most profound instances, to forgive. The true practice begins now, to listen for these echoes in our own lives, to recognize the shared humanity that lies beneath the surface of our differences, and to cultivate the quiet courage to act upon the profound understanding that even in the darkest of times, a shared light can illuminate the path forward. The kindness that survived the war endures, a quiet testament to the inextinguishable flame of our shared